His pudding is pondering. Here's a look at the Mondo Harley Quinn Waiting for My J-Man polystone statue. Based on the poster and 7-inch vinyl record sleeve by Matt Taylor, the Waiting for My J-Man statue features a lovelorn Harley Quinn relaxing on a swanky shag carpet. While listening to her favorite tune, she waits for a certain someone to come home. Continuing their line of 3D sculptures based on their posters, the statue is imbued with classic pinup styling, while faithfully recreating Taylor's art in both pose and color scheme. While Joker's darling daydreams, the first thing we're going to want to do before getting down to looking at the statue, moving my tape measure up, and more up. I'm going to actually take it right to the very top of her head. After all, that seems to be the highest point. So what I'm going to do is move it away so I capture all the full height of the statue and stop it right there. According to the readouts, the Waiting for J-Man polystone statue of Harley Quinn stands 10.3 inches in height. We can switch that to centimeters, revealing that the statue is 26.2 centimeters tall. Some minor assembly is required when you get Harley Quinn out of the box. The main statue, being that of Harley Quinn sitting on top of the shag carpet, requires little to no assembly, but the thing that's missing on top of it, you probably see there's a big noticeable hole there. To come included also with the statue, you get yourself a turntable with album. And like with the rest of the statue, when we get closer to looking at it, you'll see there's a real unique styling to it, especially the way that they've painted it. Even like just the turntable alone has something you don't tend to see too often with other statue releases. It's almost got like a real retro album cover vibe to it. You can probably see as well, judging by the fact that they've added these little swoosh marks there on the album, that the actual album is spinning. There are things that, of course, you're going to have to be very careful of. This is a polystone statue, after all. The needle, for example, is one thing you will want to be careful of. I've unfortunately noticed here, this little side piece, there is a fracture right there. I don't know if you can see it or not. It still is staying intact, but I will be very super cautious about banging it in any way because, again, like those pieces are super thin. There is some weight to it as well, being, again, made of polystone. The detailing is really quite good, but again, it's got a real retro vintage look to it. It does, of course, have a top piece. You probably have noticed that there are a couple of holes on the back and probably didn't know what that was for. There is actually a top cover piece, and it's all attached actually by magnets. So what you do is just slide this into place like that. Here we go. And you've got the top of the turntable. Now these hinges, again, something you will want to be careful of, but again, cautious is always the one thing you will want to be when handling a piece like this. But it is definitely a nice little showpiece. It does then attach very carefully, very carefully. You will want to kind of spin this around and lay this down like that. In case you are curious, does it go the other way? Well, we can actually spin this around. I'll show you. It does line up, but there's like a little noticeable gap, clearly indicating that it should be facing its way outward instead. So again, we'll just spin this around, carefully lining it up, and you'll notice right off the bat, when you line it up and fit it into the hole, there we go, the magnet just pulls it in and attaches it firmly in place, and I like that. Now let's examine the incredible display base that Mondo sculpted for this particular statue. Of course, Harley Quinn is sitting on top of a shag carpet. Probably what I will advise doing myself is just removing this again. Again, there's the little hole area there that this record turntable is going to fit into. But very carefully, I want to show you guys the detailing done to the shag carpet. Primarily a light cream color mixed nicely with a brushing of pink. It really does give you the look and vibe of a shag carpet, short of the fact it's not really shag, of course. Very carefully, tilting it upside down, you can see the undersiding of the display base. You've got Harley Quinn Waiting for My J-Man polystone statue, produced, of course, by Mondo. You'll probably also see a lot of fingerprints have settled already on the surface. And speaking of surface, you've also got a couple of rubberized feet. There's 1, 2, 3 in the corner, and 4 down below, preventing any scratches when you put the statue on a surface. Now looking at the portrait here of Harley Quinn, while her wearing a jester's outfit isn't anything new, It is certainly the application of paint that does make this one stand out from the crowd. I don't know what it is. It could be just simply the choice of colors that they used, but it does have a very vintage look to it. Can't help but also notice that when looking at the portrait here, is it perhaps just me, or does it bear some resemblance to actress Anne Hathaway? Though she has played Catwoman in the movies, never have played Harley Quinn, but it certainly does look a little bit like Anne Hathaway when I'm looking right at it. There seems no places on this statue that get left off from paint. Even her traditionally white face gets afforded a lot of additional pinks. You can see it there on her cheeks and on the bridge of her nose. There's also some of this nice rich yellow. Maybe that's the thing, along with the collar that we'll be looking at in a second, that really does give it a vintage feel. I could imagine this statue existing 50 or 60 years ago just by the way it's been colored. It is a really unique spectacle. Of course, you got the detailing done to the back areas of her jester's cowl. I like the way that it swooshes back. Normally, you'd expect to see it sticking out from the sides, but this one is very comfortably relaxed and laying back behind her collar here. I like that dark coloring of purple they've incorporated to just above her eyelashes there, and you've got some much-needed swooshes of blue just to break up a little bit of that black. It is a really different-looking Harley Quinn, not one that we're used to seeing. Of course, when you look at the rest of her coloring here, there's an off-yellowing that happens here by only the applying of the color, but there's something again about it, and I continue to say the same thing over again. It almost has, again, like a real vintage look to it. I like the sculpting of this particular statue. We'll move further back in a second so you can see all of it, but I want to show you again the detailing. You have the familiar diamonds there, sculpted on the side of the body. Now again, that's not painted simply in. They've sculpted that in so it's carved and outlined. Really does stand out. The coloring that they actually used for both the red and the black seems almost subtle. It doesn't have the real stark coloring of black. And, well, obviously there's the breakup of the red and the black alternating patches. I find like the color seems really subdued. Does that make any sense at all? Of course, you've got the little diamond shapes there also on the legs, on the thigh area there as well. But it seems very much softened colors. Even like the areas there on her pom-pom, the little cuffed sleeve there on the end has that additional yellow that's been added to it. It is a really super cool looking statue. And I'm going to do my best to, of course, spin this around. Being that it's made, of course, of polystone, there's some considerable weight that's added also to it. For the proportions of the character, let me just move it further back so you guys can actually see what it looks like here. She's a little more traditional for the era in which I would imagine this statue would be coming from. She's a little bit more averagely proportioned. Does that make a little bit more sense? She's a little bit wider in the torso, a little bit wider in the waist, for example. And it does lend well to the type of models you would expect to see be posing in album covers from the old vintage years. Again, we'll just put that statue down here for a second so you guys can actually see. We'll just do a quick spin around so you guys can also see it as well. This certainly would have served a lot better of a purpose, I feel, putting it on a turntable. The downside, of course, to putting it on a turntable is I would have to have the camera super close enough to it. I feel it would be much more beneficial to be able to bring the statue closer to the camera and show you guys all the details to it. And again, we can take that album, the turntable, put it back in place where it belongs. And it certainly does finish off the look really nicely to this particular piece. While I have been collecting Harley Quinn statues over the years, you guys know that. I'm a big collector and purveyor of Harley Quinn statues. This one stands out from the crowd in all the best ways. Not only the choice of color that they used, the sculpting alone, and the proportions to the character. Feels as if this statue I would have had in my collection for 30, 40 years. It's really the coloring, I feel, that enhances the overall experience of looking at this. And again, when I have this in a collection, this is the kind of statue that would stand out against the rest of the Harley Quinns, even though it's all really the same character. Mondo went a different take on this one, and the results are quite impressive. Here for final looks, it gives me the full opportunity to be able to spin this statue around and show you guys what it looks like from all possible angles. Through the course of this review, I decided for myself to show you guys by holding this statue. Not an easy task, let me tell you, by the fact it's made of polystone, but I wanted to show you as up close and personal as I possibly can. Then again, like I said, here in Final Looks, you guys can see what it looks like from all different angles. You can also see from the far right, a very obvious back of the box here, also showcasing what that statue could look like in a very scene-specific album cover environment. Speaking of albums, I can't help but notice there's a couple of albums in the back from the Clown Prince of Crime. Was Joker in his spare time making albums? I'd be curious the type of songs you would expect to find on there. Everybody loves a clown. I'm sure probably would be near the top of that list. And there's also some furniture in the back, just behind the sleeping hyena. Is that teak? I think I actually have teak furniture in my house. Don't laugh. Apparently it's big right now, or so I've been told. Harley Quinn definitely is a very different looking Harley than what we've seen before. I mean, everybody knows what Harley Quinn looks like in the Jester's outfit. So it's very hard pressed to come up with a different look for Harley Quinn. And yet Mondo successfully pulls that off, I feel, by going trekking not to the future, not to the way that statues should be looking, but trekking instead back to the past, giving us what almost a vintage-inspired Harley Quinn could look like, laying across some shag carpeting. I do like the look of that shag carpeting. The coloring is super rich on this. Even the areas that traditionally would be white are just brushed ever so nicely with some additional gold and yellow, all enhancing that overall vintage look to the statue. I could almost even imagine going into my grandparents' house and find the statue off somewhere in the back, just because it has that old vintage coloring to it. And I don't mean that in a negative way at all, because I like the idea of making this in a more timeless looking design, because we're not used to seeing Harley Quinn looking like this. Again, can't help but think that she looks a little bit like Anne Hathaway. Maybe it's just me. Maybe it's not just me. Let me know down below. Does it look a little bit like Anne Hathaway? Some good news, though, is that the Harley Quinn Waiting for Mr. J is available right now, although some sites have sold out on her. So if you're interested in picking this one up for yourself, you may have to scout around, check around, and see if you can pick this one up for yourself. A big thank you to the folks over at Mondo that provided this sample of the Harley Quinn that we could look at in this review. Let me know what you think of this particular statue in the comments section down below. And also for maybe your video question for today. If Joker was to make an album, what kind of songs already written and put out would you expect Mr. J to do covers of? That's a very interesting question. If you guys are also new to this channel and enjoying all the content you're seeing, be sure to hit that subscribe button down below, turn the bell notification on, and yeah, come back to this channel on a regular basis. Not only are we going to be looking at more Mondo reviews, more statue reviews, more Harley Quinn reviews, but there's also going to be a whole ton of new things also coming your way. So always keep your peepers ever peeled. And as always, guys, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.